Well, you probably heard this news during the summer break. According to the NZ Herald, it screamed 9 in 10 Kiwi kids endure trauma by age 8. New research. And it says nearly 9 in 10 Kiwi kids endure some kind of trauma before turning 8, be it bullying, parental drug or alcohol addiction, violence or family breakups. But positive experiences and care can help insulate children from lasting harm. Wow, you'll be thinking by now, 9 out of 10 kids? Trauma? Kids in New Zealand are stuffed. Childhood must be shocking for them. Well, just hold that thought because we've got some research to do on the research. So back to our article, and it says that's according to a major new study that draws a link between childhood trauma and developing obesity later in life. Using data from nearly 5,000 children tracked by Growing Up in New Zealand study, the researchers looked at what they consider adverse childhood experiences. That included being bullied or abused, having parents split up, imprisoned or addicted to drugs or alcohol, or living in homes with family violence or mental illness. Earlier studies suggested that about half of Kiwi adults had such episodes in childhood. But the latest findings out today put that prevalence much higher at 87%, with disproportionate rates amongst Māori and Pasifika children and those living in deprivation. Children who had had at least one of these traumatic experiences were twice as likely to be obese by the age of 8 as those who hadn't. And that risk worsened as the numbers of setbacks continued or mounted. Children who had had 4 or more of them, for instance, were nearly 3 times more likely to develop obesity, which in turn could lead to serious mental and physical health issues. The research also turned up some positives. Factors like parents being in committed relationships, mothers interacting with their children and being involved in social groups, and children having good early educations and living in homes with routines and rules could help counter the negative experiences. But children needed at least 4 of these insulating factors to offset the risk of obesity. Now, one of the authors wrote an article for the One News website. Childhood traumatic experiences are alarmingly common. Our analysis of data from nearly 5,000 children revealed almost 9 out of 10, 87%, faced at least one significant source of trauma by the time they were 8 years old. Multiple adverse experiences were also prevalent, with 1 in 3 children, 32%, experiencing at least 3 traumatic events. Now, note the terminology, significant source of trauma, and by the age of 8. We'll come back to that. One potential explanation could be that the accumulation of early stress in children's family, school and social environments is associated with psychological distress. This is a connection to obesity. This in turn makes children more likely to adopt unhealthy weight-related behaviours. This includes consuming excessive high-calorie comfort food, such as fast food and sugary drinks, inadequate intake of nutritious foods, poor sleep, excessive screen time, and physical inactivity. In our research, children who experienced adverse events were more likely to adopt these unhealthy behaviours. These in turn were associated with a higher risk of obesity. I just have a simple question here. Eating crappy and excessive food, poor sleep, excessive screen time and physical inactivity, whose fault is that? Is it the trauma causing that, or is it simply bad parenting? And that question doesn't seem to be asked. It goes on, despite these challenges, our research also explored a promising area, the protective and mitigating effects of positive experiences. We define positive experiences as I mentioned earlier before, parents in committed relationships, mothers interacting well with children, mothers involved in social groups, children engaged in enriching experiences and activities such as visiting libraries, museums, participating in sports and community events, children living in households with routine and rules, including those regulating bedtime, screen time, and meal times. In other words, traditional family structure with commitment and functionality. So traditional. Yeah, those darn trad mums that the Disinformation Project mocked. But here was one interesting one, children attending effective early childhood education, they said. Now, as we will see, there's an academic push for putting kids in ECE, early childhood education. And perhaps they could research the effects of long periods of ECE on very young children and the effect that it has. We have this report, which you can read on our website, which says that attending daycare for an extended time and the consequent separation from parents is a significant source of stress for many young children, which could have potentially long-term consequences for their mental and physical health as adults. And the report says there's growing evidence of profound beneficial neurobiological effects that a mother's physical presence has on her young child that cannot be achieved by anyone, including paid childcare workers. But back to this research from Auckland University screaming that 9 in 10 kids in New Zealand endure trauma before they're 8. Now, I know the immediate question you're asking is, how do they define trauma? Well, very good question. Let's dig into the research. And we've previously talked about this research. Growing Up in New Zealand longitudinal study is New Zealand's largest ongoing cohort study. It recruited almost 7,000 New Zealand children born between 2009 and 2010 in Auckland and the Waikato. Although interestingly, that number has dropped to just 4,500 now. Losing people in such a massive and lengthy study is understandable, but it appears to be a much larger attrition rate than the Christchurch longitudinal study and the Dunedin study based on a comparable time. For the Growing Up in New Zealand, it's 72% retention, which is low because Christchurch and Dunedin's retention rate was 90%. So 72 versus 90, that's quite a difference. But the last time we talked about this study was in a McBlog calling Growing Up Trans in New Zealand back in 2023. And this is some of the questioning for children, which we think is both confusing and harmful questioning of young children. Not only do you see yourself as a boy, girl, or somewhere in between, but another equally vague, distorted question, thinking about other people, do you think they see you as a boy, girl, or in between? And remember, this is being asked of 8-year-olds. Is an 8-year-old going around asking people that? Well, of course not. So, that is part of the problem that we have with this research. In fact, we think parents may have wanted to withdraw their involvement after watching that analysis that we did. Our concern is that it's been captured by gender ideologues and activists. Have a watch of that episode. I'll put a link to it. But back to this latest study. So this study is surveying almost 5,000 children at the age of 8 and their mother. And they say that the basic premise is that positive childhood experiences can lessen the impact of negative childhood experiences and thereby reduce the risk of obesity. And early on, they say ACEs, which are adverse experiences, include indicators of child abuse and family dysfunction. For example, mental illness, substance abuse, incarceration, parental separation or death, and intimate partner violence. Well, those are all serious things, aren't they? Drugs, alcohol, family breakdown, violence, all the things we've always said were risk factors for child abuse. We've been saying that for the past 20 years. Because of the attrition rate of 2,000 families, the researchers actually say this: our findings should not be considered representative of the New Zealand children population at large. Let me repeat that. Our findings should not be considered representative of the New Zealand population at large. Hey, New Zealand Herald, you want to rethink that dramatic heading again? Another limitation is that by self-reporting, mothers admit that they can lead to answers that are socially desirable, answers I think the questioners want to hear. And more importantly, answers given by 8-year-olds. Yes, 8-year-olds. Just keep that in mind. So what is defined as trauma for young children? Specifically, we constructed dichotomous indicators of exposure for 9 ACEs. Child exposure to emotional abuse, physical abuse, parental substance, alcohol, drug abuse, parental mental illness, parental incarceration, parental separation, divorce, intimate partner violence against the mother, maternal experience of ethnic discrimination, and peer bullying. Now, there's some serious adverse childhood events there, but how do they define emotional abuse or physical abuse, parental mental illness, maternal experience of ethnic discrimination or peer bullying? Well, glad you ask. You have to dig deep into the data to find this, and you've actually got to go to the Ministry of Social Development website. And here's some of the definitions. Emotional abuse is mother very often shouted, yelled, or raised their voice when child was naughty. Physical abuse. For example, mother reported smacking the child, half the time, often, very often, when child was naughty. Parental abuse, substance abuse, mother or partner reported using amphetamines, cocaine, ecstasy, opiates, hallucinogens, or party pills since the birth of the child. Yeah, it's interesting, there's no mention of the most used drug, cannabis. And I thought the Drug Foundation said party pills and drugs were okay as long as you got them tested to ensure that the illegal drug you're consuming was the pure form of the illegal drug you're consuming. Parental mental illness. For example, mother or partner was classified as moderately or severely depressed. Or does that include postnatal depression, which many mothers do experience? Interestingly, parental separation and divorce said mother was not in a relationship with the same partner when the child was 2 years old, or mother did not have a current partner during the 54-month, 2-year, or 9-month interviews. In other words, a solo mother. Oh, are they insinuating that fatherlessness and solo mothering is an adverse experience for a child? Wow, that's an admission. Mother discrimination. For example, mother felt she has ever been treated unfairly in New Zealand because of her ethnicity. Kept waiting by a health professional because of her ethnicity, treated unfairly when applying for a credit card by the police or when attending a place of education. And then for the 8-year-olds to answer, peer bullying. And remember, this is 8-year-olds being asked this. Do other children put you down, call you names, or tease you in a mean way? Do other children leave you out in a mean way? Do other students hit, push, or hurt you in a mean way? Are other children mean to you because you learn in a different way to them? Do other children use cell phones like texting or the internet like Facebook to be mean to you? Now, this is 8-year-olds and it's self-reporting. Remember that the researchers in the media were shouting that almost 9 in 10 reported at least one of these adverse experiences. I'm surprised it's not 100%. 87% had at least one. I mean, were the remaining 13% homeschoolers or something? Were they kept in a freezer? I mean, just on the bullying question alone, every child in New Zealand has suffered trauma, according to these researchers. Based on that list, I could probably get to maybe 4 of them. No comments about my weight, okay? I mean, do these all qualify as trauma? What do you think of when you hear the word trauma? Now, what I found interesting was that the researchers chose to exclude experience of death, including death of a parent, close family member, or close friend, or even a pet. Are these not traumatic? I think death of a parent is hugely traumatic. When we put down our almost 15-year-old Labrador in December, there was a lot of tears for that dog. But what's worse is that there appears to be no waiting between watching a parent punch the other parent or consuming drugs in the lounge versus being given a smack on the backside for swearing at your mother or being teased at school for having a name like mine that rhymes with blob, gob and slob. Now, here's the interesting thing. Here's the numbers under each category. And once again, this wasn't in the main research publication. You had to go searching, and this is on the Ministry of Social Development website. It averages about 20% for each category, except incarceration, which is very low, and intimate partner violence, IPV, third from the right, which is fortunately lower as well, but it's still too high. But then you get to ethnic discrimination. Remember, that's mum feeling she's been discriminated against because of her race. It's 1 in 3. And then bullying, this is 8-year-olds, 60%. Now, I'm surprised 40% of 8-year-olds say they haven't experienced any bullying or teasing or put-downs or being left out of games. So what were the positive experiences? And once again, it simply confirms what we've always been saying. Here are the positive experiences that they list. Parents in a committed relationship. Oh, so marriage does matter. Mothers interacted well with child, mother involved in social groups, child engaged in experience and activities, child lived in a house with routine and rules, and child attended effective early childhood education. Well, apart from that last one, which I'll come to, any thinking person would know that those positive experiences are just parenting 101. Interestingly, routines and rules were questions around, is there rules for watching TV? Do you go to bed at a similar time each night? And do you have family meals all together? Well, speaking of family meals, once again, we've written a report on that, which you can read on our website. All the research showing the benefits of having family dinners. But for some reason, the researchers didn't point to this. But regarding preschool, they say, no involvement in ECE may limit children from opportunities to learn in safe environments, especially for those who have experienced adverse experiences. It has been previously contended that children's involvement in quality childcare can have a protective impact for the impact of adverse experiences. No mention of mums being present. Well, read our report on childcare. I mean, they've made that conclusion up. So what was all the conclusion of this research? Well, you could probably have written this without surveying 5,000 families. They said, the importance of healthily enforced rules and routines should be emphasised for parents, health workers and educators. Research has shown that early family environments and effective parenting can influence developmental outcomes relating to flourishing, resilience and obesity. And strategies for preventing adverse experiences often align with identified positive experiences such as promoting and investing in public settings like education, healthcare services and community and recreational activities. Although finally, there's some critical theory here. Highly prevalence rates of adverse experiences amongst ethnic minority groups, particularly Māori and Pacific peoples, who also face the compounded effect of racism and colonisation, may contribute to and further entrench inequities in obesity rates and related health outcomes. Prevention of adverse experiences, particularly for Māori communities, also require addressing and healing the intergenerational and historical impacts of trauma. Now, probably not surprisingly, there was no commentary from the researchers on the importance of committed relationships, how society can encourage these, the importance of role of fathers as a protective factor, the importance of mothers nurturing their child, or, shock horror, why marriage matters so much. In fact, the word marriage is not mentioned once in both the research publication and in this analysis by the Ministry of Social Development. Even committed relationship wasn't discussed. Except to minimise it by saying, here's what they said about committed relationships. Mother in a committed relationship is not an infallible construct. Mothers may have responded positively to these questions, where, for instance, intimate partner violence may have been present. And many children grow up happy and healthy in households with separated parents. Yeah, there's only so much traditional that they can stomach and speak positively of, eh? So their argument is that trauma can lead to obesity, but their definition is so wide that it's surprising New Zealand is not the fattest, most morbidly obese nation on the planet. And interestingly, the New Zealand Health Survey found that around 1 in 8 children up to 14-year-olds are classified as obese, about 12%. But here's the other problem. This is from 2 months earlier. Same researchers involved, same longitudinal study. Setting screen time rules lowers childhood obesity risk, according to the study. And it says families who set screen time rules for their children promote healthier childhoods with better sleep patterns, which could reduce the risk of obesity. The researchers used the Growing Up in New Zealand study, and this was for children aged 4.5. So this is when they surveyed the kids at 4.5. The findings suggest that adhering to family screen time rules effectively reduced young children's screen use by ensuring they got enough sleep. Inadequate sleep had been previously associated with obesity, and children who spend less time on screen devices usually sleep better, according to previous studies. Yeah, they needed a study for that. The researcher said establishing simple, consistent screen time rules early in a child's life was a helpful strategy to support healthier habits and address obesity on a larger scale. Well, no kidding, Sherlock. Now, let me just conclude this by quoting researcher Lindsay Mitchell, who has written a number of reports for us on the link between family breakdown and an increase in cohabiting in single-parent families with poverty, incarceration, and child abuse. And she read this article in the media over January and blogged this in response to the research and the media's hysterical coverage. And she wrote, "Academics Crying Wolf." She says, "Trauma is what I expect refugee children from war-torn countries to have experienced. Turns out, though, trauma can now include a child answering yes when asked, 'Do other children put you down, call you names, or tease you in a mean way?' Some of the experiences are serious, for example, having a parent sent to prison, but others are just part and parcel of being a child. Being shouted at by mum for being naughty, or having a mum who believes she's been treated unfairly because of her ethnicity. To describe the latter two as experiencing trauma destroys the word's meaning. What bothers me even more is the bastardization of a rich language abundantly capable of intricate and nuanced description. It has happened with many words beyond trauma. For example, words like assault and violate get regularly employed in totally overblown and inappropriate ways. Guilty parties risk being accused of crying wolf, a timeless adage that describes how repeated exaggeration will only result in them being ignored or worse, laughed at. Adage is how you say that word, I think. When it comes to children, New Zealand has enough real problems without manufactured crises. Money spent on more of this melodrama is money misdirected. Academics crying wolf. Yep, exactly. This is the same manipulation of the language that we had during the anti-smacking debate. Studies cited by the opponents of smacking didn't distinguish the effects of a smack as practiced by non-abusive parents from the impact of severe physical punishment and abuse. And you'll note that smacking in this study is equated with physical abuse, which is then equated with trauma. An open hand smack on the backside or hand is equated with punches in the head or a severe beating of a child by someone high on drugs. See, it's this manipulation of the language that a smack is child abuse or violence, and that being teased or treated unfairly is as traumatic as death of a parent or drug use or family violence. It's weakened this research into what works for parents when raising good, functioning children. It also doesn't help their cause when they can't bring themselves to admit that marriage matters and that fathers matter. But we already know that they do, don't we?